The first time I saw President Obama lie was during a press conference in San Diego, where he was being asked about the kind of data that the National Security Agency was gathering up in their efforts to go through and thwart domestic terrorism. And it was pretty plain and clear that President Obama was not comfortable with the words that he was saying, because what he was saying was a lie. And he was indicating at the time that the only data that the NSA was gathering was called metadata, and that's data that has to do with phone numbers, times of day, where those calls originated from, but not the actual content data, okay? And when it comes to internet exchanges, in terms of email and texting, SMS, those kinds of things, the NSA has different requirements there. In fact, they're not held to the same standard as they are when it comes to phone calls. In fact, that data, not just the metadata of when a text message was sent from what number to what number or when it was sent, but the actual data then also becomes subject, and he lied about that. And that didn't surprise me. It surprised everybody, it seemed, but it didn't surprise me because we all lie. Even presidents lie. And I'm an Obama supporter. I was when he was president. I contributed financially to both his campaigns. I voted for him twice. Has some pretty high expectations for him, and for the most part, he met them for me. We all walked away disappointed on a number of things. I don't know of a president where we didn't, right? We're all a lot more disappointed now than we ever dreamed of being before, but that's an entirely different topic. Anyway, what I want to get into here with this is a bit of a conversation, a discussion on the ethics of lying. When is it okay to lie? Is it ever okay to lie? The chapter in the book, Knapp gets into some interesting concepts there. And to talk about ethics and lying in the same breath, for some people, that just doesn't fly because, there's a commandment out there, thou shalt not lie. So, end of discussion, right? Wrong. That's not the end of the discussion because we all lie. And we're studying lying and deception under a societal value that lying is bad, or that integrity is good, or that honesty is good. And we value these kinds of things. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we don't, or that I don't. We find some level of certainty and trust with people who have integrity, with people who we feel to be honest. But, gosh, I don't know anybody who hasn't ever lied. And obviously there's a continuum of lying. We talked about high stakes lying and low stakes lying. There's a continuum probably of ethics as well when it comes to why we go through and lie and do the things that we do. Well, there's some ideas out there. One is the commandment that thou shalt not lie, and so that's a pretty definite theological position in terms of lying and deception. It's right up there with not committing adultery and not murdering people and not stealing, right? So that's pretty wild company in terms of value, that dichotomy of value in terms of what misrepresenting the truth might be. Again, I'm going to catch myself doing this in about every clip that I do. The goal here really is to get educated on, or to help pull away the value that we have on lying, or the discount, the curse that we have on lying, and not to go through and exonerate lying and deception, but to be able to take a look at it more objectively, okay? I've said this before in a previous video. When I'm working with people who are interrogating, they have to go into the room or meet the source or the subject without a prejudgment, without prejudice. And part of that prejudice is, well, you're accused of this or you've lied about it, therefore I'm not going to view you without bias. I already have a bias against you. And if you do, and we all do, because of these values, we don't have the ability to go through and fetter out the truth about lying, about the deception, as objectively as we would if we were truly Switzerland in our approach, if we didn't have an inherent bias to what was going on. So it's under that caveat that I'm talking about this in terms of these ethics, because there are times when you've lied that you felt entirely justified, right? And I'm not sure maybe if the idea that you broke a commandment came back to you and made you feel shameful or guilty about doing that. But there are people who do that. And in fact, research shows that more women feel that way than men do, because women are more closely tied to their feelings of morality and of ethics than men are. And that's probably fodder for a different discussion that we can get into. There's an idea that lying disrespects humanity. There's a concept that if you lie about one thing, then who's to say that you're not going to lie about another, right? Well, there's a slippery slope to that kind of thing. But nonetheless, we have a tendency to go through and apply these types of points of view or frames of reference to the idea of lying. I'm trying to think about low stakes and high stakes types of lies that that we get into. We've been lied to before. We've had other presidents lied to us. George W. Bush lied to us about getting us involved in the war in the Gulf, with the idea that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Or, in fact, the lie was perpetuated by people who actually believed it. Colin Powell sat before the United Nations and declared, as the Secretary of Defense of the United States, that the enemy had weapons of mass destruction, and that was enough leverage for us to go through and declare war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and to go through and wage that war for years. It's still going on, and the amount of blood and treasure that's been lost has been lost over that lie. We've been lied to before in terms of national security. We're lied to all the time in terms of trying to go through and keep things at a level where we can enforce certain aspects of homeland security. And we've been lied to frivolously on other points of policy, which I won't get into because I'm too passionate about that. Well, at what point does lying cross that line of you probably shouldn't have gone there? And I don't have the answer to that question. I'm sorry to disappoint you if that's the case. I don't have that answer for you. I have the answer for me, because I weigh the evidence, I look at the reasoning. I also look at all the other indicators, cues, both verbally and non-verbally, in terms of whether or not the individual is fabricating the truth or they're telling the truth. There's a lot going on, and as far as how dense those cues can be. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. We'll get into nonverbal and verbal cues of deception. But to me, it's a whole package, and I can't summarily go through and say, boom, just based on the fact of what you said, I think you're lying. I need to go through and find more facts. In fact, we all do. And so to apply some type of ethical rubric to that, lying's okay only when, or if it's lessening pain on somebody to not tell them the truth, if it goes through and protects somebody by not telling them exactly what's going on with their cancer diagnosis, or whatever. We can find all kinds of justifications. Whether or not that justification is right isn't up for all of us to decide. It's on a context by context, case by case kind of basis there. Knapp goes through in the book and puts out, well, here's some ideas to think about in terms of ethics and deception. And I think this is interesting. One is, well, try to tell the truth most of the time. Okay, how do we qualify and quantify that in terms of most of the time and most of everything that we say? We'll try, that's kind of a foregone conclusion. I would like to say that the people that I live with and rub shoulders with tell the truth most of the time. I tell the truth most of the time. I try to tell the truth almost all the time. And as a result, there are times when I've been accused of being brutally honest. That's what I appreciate about my spouse. She tells the truth all the time. And even when I don't like what it is that she has to say. And she might sugarcoat some things, and I might sugarcoat some things back to her as well. But now we're pretty clear on what is actual and factual and what isn't in terms of our content of our conversation. Sorry, I say in terms of a lot that way. He says to consider the alternatives to lying. Well, the only alternatives that I know to lying is telling the truth. I guess we can get into the sin of omission, of not telling the truth and just kind of letting it slide by, or getting into a different interpretation of a word, like Wild Bill Clinton did when he tried to redefine the verb is. That all depends on what the meaning of is. I'll try to find that clip and post it up for you to watch. Maybe we'll use that for you to go through and do some of your lying detection techniques, both verbally and non-verbally. The one we're going to look at deals with Dick Cheney, who is a shark of a liar that way. He tells us to consider discovery, and I like this idea. If you know how to do it really well, which means that you're doing some interrogative practices or interrogative practices, which sounds a little more benign, in terms of discovery, asking the right questions, timing out your questions. When the subject answers your question, you stay silent and you look at them. We call that discovery. We wait. I can think of few situations that I've been in where I was deposing a subject, where after they stopped giving me their answer, and I waited and waited until they were uncomfortable, that they didn't have more to say. More often than not, they always had something else to come to talk about after that awkward silence. And in interrogation, we call it discovery. We wait for things to come about. Questions, the way we form them, the way we rephrase those questions. And if you're not careful with that, and there's a skill to doing this. In fact, there's a whole school, a number of schools out there. The military has one, but there's a workshop out there that gets into interrogation practices. If you don't do it right, people see right through you, and also you're kind of breaching your own ethics by using some type of interrogative skills in an individual who doesn't realize that you have that ability there. The last idea that Nat puts out there is, well, just follow the golden rule. I like that a lot. And not necessarily because the golden rule has an origin in theology. In fact, if you look at the four main ideologies that are out there, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Hinduism, well, Buddhism, we can throw that one in there as well. They all have an interpretation of this concept of how we probably ought to treat people. Love your neighbor as yourself. Treat people like you want to be treated. Don't want for your brother what you wouldn't want for yourself. Yeah, they'll come back to the same kind of idea. Again, that becomes problematic though, because if you're lying to yourself, and if you've fabricated an alternate reality in which you live, and you're not realizing maybe that you might be hurting people through that, then treating other people likewise might not be the best idea. And that's a good segue for me to get into the next video. We're going to talk about the self in self-perception and lying to yourself and why we do that. And the link for that is probably going to come up right about there, okay? All right, so you got something to say? Comment. I see that you can't comment on these posts, so open up a comment, and you can open up a discussion post and talk about this as well. And I might go through and do the same thing, okay? All right. Talk to you later.